Hello and welcome to another Red Sky University video. In this video I'm going to talk about Restura and what Restura is. So this is going to be a quick overview video. We're not going to go particularly deep in anything like setting up Restura for the first time or anything like that. It's just kind of at a glance what Restura is. But before I dive into Restura, I'm going to actually explain why the name Restura and what it means and everything. So before we started with Restura, we actually used a tool for a little bit, kind of tried it out, called Restura. And Restura is a GraphQL CMS system is kind of the best way. It's an entire ecosystem that uses GraphQL that ties directly into a database that allows you to perform database level queries using GraphQL, as well as inserts and actions and a bunch of other stuff. So here is an example Restura instance where I've got the graphical kind of tool, which is really kind of neat. It allows you to write queries. It allows you to build queries. So over here on the left is all the different, I would say, kind of objects that I can fetch data from. So for example, I could go and click on a company and say I wanted to get a company, and from that I want to get the ID and the name from that company. I hit play and boom, it actually goes off, sends an HTTP request with GraphQL to a server that's running, converts that into SQL, and then queries the database and returns a response. So that's pretty neat. Very fast, and obviously you can type here, and it has autocomplete and stuff like that. Now it gets a little bit more complicated, where you wanted to say like, hey, let's try to find the one where the ID equals 1. So in fact, I don't remember it enough that I'm going to use the actual little tool to help you. So I'm going to say where ID equals, and then I'm just going to say 1. And so it's this kind of syntax where you have kind of this this almost JavaScript object notation here. So if we play it, now we just get our 1, which is kind of cool and neat and stuff. But a lot of times what you do is you take kind of this query here and extract it into like a recallable expression, kind of like a function. And so I can do that here, I think, by clicking here and pulling that up into this thing. So now this becomes like a query, and it passes in 1 from it. And so I can hit play, it still works. If I take out the default parameter, I think it's been a while, so now it's going to complain that I'm not sending it in here. So you have to come down here and you have to say ID is 1. And it has to be a true JavaScript object. Let's see if this works. It doesn't. But either way, it's something like that is what you need to do there for it. What else it provides is it provides a database kind of manager where you can kind of click through and see the different tables in your database. It allows you to set up things like a permission level based on the role that you have. So developer could do inserts or selects or deletes and all that. And then if you needed to do something like custom, like when you query this, like let's say we're doing a login, those are called actions in Restura. And so you have to create an action for it. You have to write a mutation action and kind of do this, and their tool helps you kind of build it all out and do all that kind of stuff. But basically figured it all out and realized that we would find little bugs here and there. Like I think I found a bug in here that it wasn't doing that. I reported it back to Restura, and it just felt like, I couldn't go in and obviously change and fix it. It is open source, so I suppose I could have, but it felt like I would be doing quite a bit of work to get to that level. And so at Red Sky, one of the things that we kind of preach as a core component to our business is we try to minimize the amount of black boxes that we use. If we can't build it ourselves, then we don't really want to use it. And so it started us thinking, like, how could we use the concepts that are in Restura, but make it not GraphQL, which GraphQL has some of its own things. You can find lots of articles online. You'll find the caching is one of the big concerns about it. A lot of overhead to kind of set up on simple, small little projects. GraphQL is not nearly as popular as RESTful APIs. And a lot of people are even starting to abandon them and go to like TRPC, where it has a tight coupling from the front end to the back end with your types. Because one of the things that happens with Restura is you will generate a number of these queries or have them and want to reuse them, and you'll have to use other tooling to kind of generate your TypeScript types from that. Things like React query plugins, and then you have to add in plugins for PHP Storm and do all that kind of stuff. And so it made us think, like, could we take some of these concepts that they have here and build them into our own RESTful version? And so we came up with Restura. Obviously, as engineers, we don't come up with the best names, so we have Restura, and right now I can log in with a whatever login password, and here I am. I'm presented with my database view. I can jump to API or go to global. In our database view, we have a number of things. We have all the different, so we have a table called meeting, for example, here. We have all these columns here with our primary key on ID. We can have the types in here, we have lengths, and basically all the major settings you'd have with the database. And we also have permissions, like you can scope it down so that if it's nothing, then everybody has permission to that column. But you could say only super admins can access the created on date time stamp on that one. Notice when I make a change, I get this preview schema that pops up right there. I have a versioning system in it. I could add tables, I can delete tables. If I click preview, it gets this little slide out. And what's going to happen is it'll show kind of some difference in there. Right now, since permissions are not really a core feature of SQL, it's showing that there's no changes there. But if I actually come here and change this to like a Boolean, an actual core SQL type change here, I'll load the preview and I will get that the SQL statements, it's modified. Here's the SQL statements that you'll need to run to actually do that. And we don't actually run those on there. Database changes are something that are very complex and intricate, such that you don't want to just kind of run them willy-nilly and just by hitting submit. We wanted it so that this gives you a preview of what you should run. You can copy that to your clipboard and then go into some tool like PHP Storm or Data Grip and actually run those commands one at a time. So what I'm going to do here, you can always refresh and just kind of reset back to where you're at. On the database table, you can, it's got your columns, it's got your indexes or indices, your foreign keys. And so sometimes this gets quite a bit. You could, just limit it so you're only showing the columns in there. So now those are hidden. We have a couple little hot keyboard shortcuts, not shortcuts, but kind of helpers, in that sense that if you write like, I think like zip code, it automatically detects it's a varchar. Let's see here, it might be zip code. Nope. If we do like a timestamp, we normally end those in on. So like removed on, if I have the on at the end, it'll recognize that should probably be a date time. You can always come in here and change it after the fact for there. We also added like a status as far as I already have a status. Status new, and you can do enum types. So if we come down here and do enum there, we can actually come in here and put values in like healthy and not healthy. And so you can have enum statuses, which is really cool because we'll translate those into TypeScript types of just those as well. And so on and so forth. So there's a lot you can do in the database builder. The main thing is that for a type coupling between the front end and the back end, you want to really have a strong schema that defines all of your types that are in your database so that you can use them later on. I'm just going to refresh here and go to the API section. What this allows us to do is we can actually build out in a user interface all of our endpoints, and every single one of them has to be in here. It's critical that even if you're doing custom ones or whatever, everything kind of goes through here. The nice thing about it, this is a project for our PM tool, but the nice thing about it is we could generate Postman collections. We could generate Swagger docs or open API documentation off of all of the stuff we have in here. And so that's why some of these things might not necessarily be needed for REST, but they're needed for documentation. So for example, I'm looking at the budget phase get method. So this would be, I'm getting out of budget, probably passing in some sort of phase, so the phase for a certain budget. You can look at it here. We have 3 tabs across the top here. We have our API details of what kind of defines this endpoint. We have the response that's going to be returned on that, and I'll get to that in a second. And then we have kind of the raw data. The raw data is kind of the culmination of these 2 tabs together in the JSON object, and this is what's going to get stuffed into the schema that runs in the Restura engine. It's very helpful sometimes if you need to kind of copy and paste sections from one endpoint to another, or if you're maybe developing new features for the engine and you just want to add it in here really quick and test it before you add the UI elements for it. So I'm just going to go down through here real quick. The type is the type of endpoint it is, and when it says one item, that means it's going to return one item or one object. Remember, they're always still going to be wrapped in an object with data, so data is just going to equal one JSON object that's going to be defined. The other options are an array of items, so it could be an object array. We could do a paginated list. We can do a custom one item where the custom endpoint is going to return just one thing, and a custom array of those as well. Next, we have the name, again for documentation purposes, description. We've come down here to where we have the permissions, and this is who is allowed to call this endpoint. It's a drop-down list. You can clear it out. You can just randomly select a few of these. If it's completely empty, that means anybody can call it, even including unauthenticated people. Next, we get down to the endpoint type. So we have a get, post, put, patch, delete. Just real quick, get is if you're going to return the object. Post is if you're going to create a completely new entry in the database. Put would be where you're going to update an entry in the database, but you're going to replace everything in that. So you have to send up the entire object model that's going to replace what's in the database or the model. Patch would be if you're only going to modify a portion of it, like you just want to pass up 2 or 3 fields. You don't want to pass up the entire object again. And then, of course, delete is deleting there. So we have the path. It's always going to be prefixed by API v1. So these are API v1 endpoints. And eventually we'll have a drop-down selector where you can select if you have v1 or v2 and stuff. The next one is kind of, you have to define the base table that this method is going to operate against. So in this case, we're going to pull from the budget table in the database. And if we come back here and we search for budget, we have budget breakdown, and then we have budget here. So these are kind of the columns that we might interact with. It has some foreign keys to other tables that we might even pull in and reference in there. So if I come back here, and so budget is the table. Parameters are the parameters that we're going to send in to request from it. So you can put them as required or non-required parameters. You can do some sort of validators on the incoming. So this is doing a type check that it's a number. Let's say I wanted to add another validator that says, well, that number has to be a minimum of 10 and a maximum of, 1,000. And let's just say, for instance, we're going to pass up a status and we want it to be one of these strings. So we could say it needs to be either healthy or unhealthy. And it has to be one of those. It'll validate that on the front end there. And you can keep on adding more and more, delete them. You can make them required or not, and such. Next is if you're going to take this table of budget and actually join it onto another one. So in this case, we're joining onto the budget breakdown to kind of see where all those different prices come from. And then we're going to kind of add those where clauses that we saw in in Restura, and we've got kind of a nice little builder here. You can add more statements where you're going to say, well, where, and you get to see all the foreign key relationships with the table or just it itself. And I can say where status equals, I could say healthy, and that would return all of them. Or maybe I wanted to use this parameter that's status right there. Well, to do that, we have a special key value, which is the $sign. If I type $sign, it'll actually give me this little pop-up helper, and I can choose, I can use my keys, keyboard keys, or I can use my mouse. I can choose for status. So budget status equals that status there. And then also you might see this little hashtag. That's another one that refers to global parameters that are used. And so these are maybe derived parameters based on the user's authentication method that they used. And we're going to apply a number of different parameters that kind of scope them to their project. In this case, we have a multi-tenant system. And so the company in this case is related to who logged in, but it's not something we wanted to allow the user to pass up, because obviously the naive way would be like, well, it could pass up their company ID and it has to be a number on this. That would be bad, because then essentially somebody could hack the system and send whatever company ID they want into that, and we would change this obviously to a $sign. Again, that this would not be the way to go there. And then finally, you can, if it's a single item, you can maybe group them based off of that, based off of a parameter. So you could group everything by maybe their type, and that would return them as like if you're doing an SQL query with a group by on that as well. So I'm just going to kind of refresh so we kind of get back to square one with this one. Joins, you can choose whether it's an inner join or a left join. You can actually even come in here and just kind of add and company ID equals 4, and so that would go into your join statement as well there. You can do ors there, so a lot of control there. I'm going to go to the response now and just kind of show you everything here. You can kind of see that this is an object, and so this is the values of the objects that are going to return, whereas this shows you where it's pulling it from. So it's pulling it from the budget table ID, budget created on, and so on and so forth. And then you can kind of see here this is pulling from the budget breakdown created on. And let me show you how we can kind of create this. I'm just going to kind of start deleting kind of everything here, and I'm just going to kind of re-add everything. So I'm going to go to add property. Here's the budget. Let's say I wanted everything out of this. I'm just going to click this add all. You can see them being added on in the back there. It keeps it up here in case I wanted to add some more stuff. So if I wanted to add the budget breakdown, I could click on that, click on that, click on that, and you can kind of just see that they get added on here. Now let's say I didn't like the name of this budget breakdown development. Well, I could just call it the breakdown budget and hit enter there, and that will change the value that's going to be returned there. I can also remove stuff. Maybe I don't want to show their company ID by just clicking the delete there, and so on. Now another thing we can do is we could add an entirely different subquery that has nothing to do with this table, or maybe it does, by doing add a subquery. So what I'm going to do here is I get this little pop-up. I can again choose whatever table I want. So let's just say I'm going to do tag, and I'm going to maybe not necessarily have any tags there, but I'm going to add a statement on it. So where the company ID equals and company ID, and that would pull down all the company ID stuff, any tag that is associated with this, and I could group again, or I could order them by the tags created on, or maybe the tag name, so they come back alphabetically in ascending order. And then once I save that, I have down here, you can see you're going to get an object array back. And with this, I'm going to add a property there, and maybe all I care about is just the name and the ID of the tag. And so now I have an object array of tags for everything that's going to get returned on there. So a lot of flexibility is inherent with these responses. So let me go and kind of show this in action. Let's make an endpoint that's a test endpoint. So I'm just going to call test and testing. I don't know. Let's allow no permission, so it's just completely open authentication wise. I'm going to give it an endpoint test get, and oh, I already have one in here. Let me delete this one and this one, and but I'm just gonna call this test2 just to keep going without refreshing and stuff. So test2, and maybe I want to get the task notes out of there, and basically, let's say I'm gonna get one item, so let's have them pass in a task note ID. So ID, and we're just gonna put this as a number, and required. I am going to now add a where statement that says my task note ID equals ID. Hit that right there, and I'm going to preview my changes. So I deleted those two other test endpoints. I'm adding one endpoint now. I'm going to submit that, and that's all great. And that actually happens real time. You don't have to restart your server or do anything like that. It is up, running, ready to go, and ready to send stuff. So I'm going to actually come over to Postman, and I'm going to create a request in this test folder. I'll call it test. We're going to get from our host API v1 test2, I think I called it. And what I'm going to do first here is I'm not going to send any query parameters. So I'm going to do something specifically wrong. And if I send that, I get back a bad request. Request parameter ID is required but missing. And that's what I expected. Since we're in debug mode on a dev server, we're going to get the call stack where it's through the air. But this is the main thing. Bad request parameter ID is missing. All right, well, let's add it in. And I'm going to purposely put in a string instead of a number. And I'm going to send that, and we get request param ID with value ASDF is not of type number. Well, we can solve that. So I'm just going to try 1 now. And you are not authorized for this data. So I've seen this before, and what this actually means is kind of an error we need to fix, but it basically means we didn't put anything in our response. We kind of skipped a step. So let's go ahead and add in, well, we want the task node ID. We want the, let's see here, the message that's correlated to it. And that's about it. So I'm going to go back here, and now I can hit preview, submit. Wait a second, and then I'm just going to send it again, and bang, I get an object back that is the ID and the message of that. So really cool. And what I can do also is I can come back here, and let's say I want to get the note or the task that I was associated with this note, like maybe its details. So I can just do a join, and I can get this nice little table here, and I'm interested in the task that was referencing that task ID. So I just go ahead and hit plus on that, and now I have a join on those tables, and I can come back here, and actually I'm going to do something. I'm going to say, well, I forgot to do this. I forgot to put the join on here, but I know that the task node is effectively joined by this task ID. So I can come here and I can get the name of the task, I can get the description of the task, and get the ID of that task, and I can just close this, and they're all prefix: task name, task description, task ID. And what happens is it automatically adds that join on for me. So kind of takes care of that work for you. Preview, submit, and then I go back to Postman, send it, and there I go. I get the information that was associated with that task, not just the message, comment kind of on that task. So very powerful there. And this video is getting a little bit long, so let me just jump through some of the other things. One of the things we get is we get a global kind of settings here. So these are custom types, things that might be a little bit more difficult to kind of build out, and you might use them on custom endpoints. So you can kind of just type in here whatever you want. So export my custom type, and we can say, you know, an ID of number and name string kind of thing there. Global parameters, these are things that you could use inside that's maybe specific to your REST backend that gets added on. So maybe there's a platform ID or a user ID. These define the different kind of roles that your system would have. You can define more and less, delete them out, whatever. So let's say I come back to my test endpoint and I change it to a custom one item. Now there's no longer a table associated to it, but it's just an endpoint that we can build. We can still have permissions on it. We can still have the method, the parameters. But let's say the parameters that you wanted to are more complex. So my custom, let's just call this request, and you know, it might have some nested object here, and so we could say, you know, maybe an ID there and some nested name of string there, and then we'll also make a my custom response, and we'll ID number. I'll just leave it like that. And so we can come into our API and we can come down here and we can build out parameters again. And if they're simple, if they're like a standard thing, you can do that. You can add some more type checking onto it where you have min maxes and such. Or we can say, no, this is a kind of a custom parameter type, and we're gonna come off of here and actually choose one of these that are on there. And I think export, I forgot an interface, so they weren't showing up because I was missing that interface. So if I add that and I come back to my API, I can have my custom request. And this is just kind of a read only. You can't change this, but it gives you a preview of what it is. And then same thing with the response. I can choose, you know, a standard type here, or I can choose my custom response, and there we go, we have it. Again, you save that, and we'll have another video on creating custom endpoints because it's obviously custom and it has a different way of actually creating them. So what I want to do now is I want to actually jump over to the front end and how it works just real quick, because I think it's actually really powerful. So what we have here is I have a PM tool application, and I've got a number of different things in here. And let me just go to like a page and show you how the standard kind of requests work here. Let me update to the latest version, and there's some cool stuff. So for example, down here is where we actually send off the requests to update a user. We use a namespace like API request v1, and then the functions. So this is an auto-generated file. Let me take a step back here. And we have this folder called generated here that has these files that get essentially generated from the schema. So when you first start your application, the script will run and it will go and download the latest schema, and it will generate these files. So we'll have an API file that describes every single request and response and request there. We'll have a hooks file which generates a nice little hook that's very similar to React query. Although I haven't found myself really wanting to use it, the real power is this API request, which essentially makes every single request response for getting, updating, deleting. It just handles it for you. It generates all the details there, the response there. You never touch this file because it's obviously generated. And then the models is the database schema associated with it. So what we can do here is I'm just gonna bring up the terminal and I'm gonna do yarn start. And in that fast, it already downloaded it, and it generated all these files based on what we have in here. So if I click in here, I can see my get test2 that we did with the requests and the URL that it has there. I can go to the input requests and the response that we have here from what we had. If in the database the column was marked as a nullable column, you'll get an optional parameter here because it could potentially be nulled or not there. So we have those types of tie-ins. But now let's say I go to my profile page and I want to request from that. I want to hit that test request. Well, I can just come here and say, test response equals await, and I can say API request dot, and you can see here there's the get request too, and it's already yelling at me TypeScript because I'm not passing in any request parameters. So if I pass them in there, it's still yelling at me because it's not right. I can hit Alt Enter and implement all, and there we go. And so I have full TypeScript support that told me exactly what I have there. I can also, console log this, or I've got all the definitions and types of everything here. And for example, message, it showed it as possibly undefined. ID is a number, task description. So it makes things like really fast. And so let's say I have task description here. This is what I love about it. And I come back to here. I'm just going to refresh so I throw away my custom message around. But I'm going to change task description to task descriptions. Put a couple S's on there. Preview, submit, and I'll come back here and I'll just stop it and I'll restart it, and all of a sudden now I get an error in TypeScript saying, hey, we don't know what descriptions is, do you want this? And I complete it and I'm done. So it has that really strong coupling between the front end and the back end, and with TypeScript and the IDEs we have these days, it just makes things really smooth. So I'm going to end it here because this video got a little bit long, and we'll go into more detail and depth on future videos. So hopefully this was helpful. Thanks.